So thank you everyone for joining us on this steamy June afternoon for the Stockbridge Library's online poetry series entitled Medicine for the Soul. This program started quite some time ago. We are now in week 56 of bringing poetry to the Stockbridge community and far beyond. And we have had a series of very talented poets read for us, and today is no exception. Today, I'm delighted to introduce Kathryn Petrucelli, who's joining us today from the Pioneer Valley in Northampton, and she will read her work for us. And just a brief bio of Kathryn before I turn the program over to John Gillespie, who I guess as of today is the former president of our board.
Well, I think I'm president till June 30th.
Perfect. So the president of our board here at the Stockbridge Library, Museum and Archives, and he will engage in a little Q&A with Kathryn. Then Kathryn will read some of her work for us. And after that, we will open to the audience for questions and comments. Please feel free to use the chat box at any time. And let me tell you a little bit about Kathryn. She is a bi-coastal performer, so she's here with us on the East Coast, but also has some experience and presenting on the West Coast as well. She has an MA in teaching English language learners, and her professional life has been extremely varied. Some highlights: translating the Hotel California for Hungarian high schoolers, and interestingly, anthologizing poetry by rival gang members. She got her start in the world of poetry slam and spoken word, and Kathryn believes strongly in the power of our voices. She's also passionate about getting contemporary poetry, particularly that of poets of color, in front of youth. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in the Southern Review, New Ohio Review, Rattle, Poet Lore, Tinderbox, December, and Swim. Kathryn has been nominated for Best of the Net 2020 and is a past winner of San Francisco's Litquake Essay Contest and a finalist for the 2019 Omni-Dawn Broadside Poetry Prize. And she currently teaches online writing workshops from Western Mass. Kathryn, we're delighted to have you with us. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Wendy. Happy to be here.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Wendy. So Wendy, just a technical question. You're going to sign off now. So when I'm done with the program, I just exit and that's it, or? Okay. Yeah, Wendy is covering the library front desk because it's 80 degrees inside the library because the air conditioning doesn't work. And it really doesn't work downstairs in the museum either. So we're having a, two HVAC crises at the same time. So,
exactly.
So Kathryn, every week we spend, 5 minutes or so, getting to know the poet and really your creative process. So there have been so many themes in 2020 and even 2021, pandemic, racial injustice, economic inequality, the political thing just never ends. Have some of those themes found themselves in your work?
Well, for sure, this year has affected my work, I would say significantly. Not always on the page exactly. So, I've written a handful of pandemic poems that came along, and sometimes those have taken me to interesting places. Some of my work brushes up against the climate crisis for sure. But I think the biggest impact, I would say, would for sure be the racial injustices and social justice movement that's come along. In the sense that, as a teacher, And, I teach adults, but I also teach youth. I teach through mass poetry for middle and high school students, as well as, California Poets in the Schools in the past and other organizations. And I felt pretty early on, probably, it always feels funny to say starting with, because obviously it started 400 years ago, but starting with Breonna Taylor, really, for me personally, with, preceded, of course, by Ahmaud Arbery as well, but Breonna Taylor, for whom we have no video nor justice. I could see that if I wanted to be relevant, and as obviously the spring and summer progressed last year, if I wanted any chance to make any kind of positive impact or have any chance at relevancy, then I needed to get super up to speed, super fast on what was being written right now by contemporary poets of color. And I started to just stuff myself with poetry, really. I mean, I bought more books in the last year and a half, more poetry books than ever, because I was always the person that might wander into like the used bookstore and see what was on the shelf, and it was very intentional this year. I mean, I was just buying stacks of books at a time, essentially, BIPOC poets, particularly women of color, and reading everything I could, and then, sharing that, trying to teach some of that, and also signing up for every weekly or daily poetry offering online, just really trying to know what was being written right now. And there's amazing, amazing work being written right now.
Great. No, fantastic. And I applaud your deep diving into those issues. So how does a poem start for you? I didn't know, we've heard some poets have one way, some poets it's gamma rays, or it's no, I'm only kidding. No, the whole thing is it can happen so many different ways. I didn't know if there was one way, a conversation, or you're reading these other poems that kind of kick something off for you.
Yeah, well, reading other people's work is a huge springboard for me. And it's also a lot of times how I teach. So, looking at a poem and being like, what did they do? I feel this way when I read this poem, what made me feel that way? How did they do that? Can I do that? Or just stealing words. I really love stealing words. But, I heard Ross Gay say recently that if he figures out his process, he might as well just stop, because then what would be the point? And I was really uplifted by that answer. But yeah, I mean, there's sometimes there's an image or a line that gets stuck in my head. There's research, there's some bigger research. I have a couple of series that I might read a couple from today that involves some more in-depth research, but there's also like a little bit of research that can happen just when you're in the middle of something and you're like, oh, what's the name of that bird? Or, I wonder what the nesting habits of, is. And,
yeah.
And then, it's really true that like fact is weirder than fiction, because we're just gifted all of these amazing metaphors from the universe, because so often, you learn something and you're like, oh, wow, well, that's just going to slide right into something I can say. Yeah, but there's lots. Intense emotion. That's a good starting point.
There we go. We got the full kaleidoscope of so I feel like, what did I learn at summer camp? But I think what I've learned through week 56 is poems are often never complete, never done. They're lying in wait for another resuscitation or review. So how do you know when things are ready to be put in a book or submitted to a journal? How do you know when that's ready?
Yeah. I read aloud as part of my process, even very early on. So I'm always listening to the poems and kind of combing through them. I start with pen and paper. Eventually, once it's typed, I'm still like printing out. So I have something physical I'm working with often. And I'm reading through, if I'm actively working on a poem, like let's say over a week, every one of those days, I might read that poem half a dozen times or more. But once I get it to a place where it's not just sort of tied up neatly, that I feel like I have gotten as far as I can into a deeper layer of what the poem wants to tell me. Maybe I've hopefully learned something, I've surprised myself a little bit, and things start to feel complete. Then it's about sharing it with a trusted reader, because I mean, we can never, I think, be our own editors in the end. Yeah. We really need that outside voice, that outside eye to kind of look at something and tell us what we're doing.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
No, that's great. That's great. So please share some of your poems and writing with us.
Sure. Thank you. I'm gonna start a timer. And if it's okay with everybody, I'm actually going to start by reading someone else's poem. Everybody laments like all the poor poets that had books come out during the pandemic. And I do feel for them. And we needed those books. Like we needed Danuta Lemaris's Bonfire Opera and Hafisa Gitar's Un-American, and we needed this one too. This is Natalie Diaz, Post-Colonial Love Poem. And so I'm going to read just a small part of a longer poem. For those that don't know, Natalie Diaz teaches at Arizona State University. She is Mojave and an enrolled member of the Gila River Indian tribe. And this poem that I'm going to read from is called Exhibits from the American Water Museum. And the American Water Museum is something that she is imagining. The river is kind of everything for her. And I'm going to read exhibit number 88. They are numbered but not consecutive. And number 88 is a letter. It's footnoted here that this is the last love letter written to the last river. It was the wish of the last river that the letter not be made public until 100 years after her death. You remember everything. Carve a water line of my transgressions, and despite all I've done, you suffered to return to me. You fed the mesquite's thorns and the sweet of its glowing beans. You've pulled me under and released me clean. You made me new, something better than good. Like me, you are a fast body, a coppery current. I laid in your bed. I kept you for myself, except you are myself, and kept me instead. I promise I'm not getting paid for this promotion. Natalie Diaz. So I wanted to start with that because, gosh, there's so much good stuff out there. And because I feel like it speaks to some of how I'm going to introduce my pieces. My first couple poems are also epistolary poems, letter poems. And they have a lot to say about water, all of the poems, although my chosen body of water is the ocean. And I also touch against the climate crisis, as I mentioned. This first piece is from a series of letter poems to West Coast flora that I desperately miss. And I also had in mind when I wrote this, the fires that happened in Australia a while back. So this is called Sticky Monkey Flower. Latin name Mimulus aurantiacus. So sorry, I turned off the air conditioner so you don't hear the humming, and now I'm kind of done. Sticky monkey flower. Puckered for a kiss, your flower's golden lips beg, all the way up the trail. Are you just about the show? Sticky monkey, stage name to beat. Look at the audience you draw. Bush lupin, prickly pear, Indian paintbrush, scarlet pimpernel, poison oak draped around you like it owns you. It never used to be like this, all bustle and flame. You were salve, eased fever. The coast Miwok, the Pomo, they knew. You relieved burning. Have we forgotten your roots? These days, it feels like a matter of time. Everyone at the party knocking paper cups together, pointing manicured fingers at the view, a petal away from combusting. Right now, in another place, the blazes chase glossy black cockatoos, water skinks, bristlebirds. How deep is memory buried? So beautiful, your scorched little mouths. And this next one is for the artichoke, the humble artichoke. And some of you may know that the artichoke has a Greek myth attached to it. The artichoke was formerly a woman named Cynara that Zeus fell in love with. And as we know, if the gods fall in love with you, you're in trouble. So this is artichoke, Cynara scolimus. You were still a woman then, thistled mind, prone to action, when Zeus found you lounging by the sea. Your beauty stole his godly breath, and while his brother looked away, knowing no other path to love than to possess, he snatched you from the shore, placed you on that cold peak. Though he brought you to the throne of gods, homesick, you left again to see the landscape you held dear, live in the possibility of who you were. That was all it took. He turned you from human form, pointed leaves, indigo crown in flower, a testimony, still beautiful, still strong. We are no strangers to a man's wrath. This just another story of a woman punished for loving her home, for needing to return. It has been written and rewritten, presumed deities too easy to betray, whose passion cannot bear for us to adore more than them alone. And so create of us stars, plant us in earth. We've learned our lesson well. Learned even to love our assassins. We can be anything. Of course we can. Anything they can imagine. Each time I swallow your heart, I wonder what it dreamed of. Feel on my tongue the weight of its worth. So my recurring theme is home. And so I sort of have a little sampling of all the different kinds of ways that I work through home in what I'm reading you today. And this next one kind of introduces another kind of home, which for me is language. If it wasn't 1,000 degrees, I would be in my studio right now and you would see next to me my evolution of the alphabet poster, which, just proves what a complete language geek I am. A proud language geek. And, talking about how poems can start, this next poem began really when I was reading another poet and I just fell in love with her name. The name of the poet had nothing to do with the poem. This is called Renaming. I read the name of the poet and it's so lovely. diphthongs gliding into diphthongs, letters disappearing because of what is in front of them. Their futures softened edges, sounds dovetailing in a language where women carry children on their backs in woven cloth, shushing only with repetition, motion of work, voices of other women talking about their day. In these languages, beauty is a rush, tongue of a skirt, flush of familiar faces at the market. Then there's English, where syllables fight each other, futures, hard things denoted by something that comes before the action, as if we figured everything out in advance. I want to rename myself, to try on resonance like the rush of a river, the mouth a cave of origin, waves as they leave it rolling in alluring rhythms. I will rename the flowers, too, the grasses, colors, names for the smell of bread, the whole matrilineal line, until we would ululate when we spoke, fetching feelings of delicate grief, such handsome truths, until the shapes of words offered themselves to us, and we stepped through, free. All right, in the summer of 2019, before time, I was lucky enough to go with my family to Italy. And one of the places we went was a town due east of Naples, where my grandfather comes from. This is called Blood, for Carmela and the residents of Castelfranco and Miscano. The bells have already rung. She propels me from the back, up the aisle to the front pew. The choir is unlocking their soft throats. Notes of piety swoop around the congregation like the evening starlings in the piazza outside. Behind me, she is singing too, a scarf swept across her slender neck, shot of purple and red. She has fed me, housed me, shown me the ministry of cheese making. My de facto sister, who holds my chin in her hand, tells me she knows my face. I am from here. Sangue non mente, blood doesn't lie. After Mass, she begins the introductions so that Le Signore may argue who knows more about my patchy genealogy, tipping plastic cups of Prosecco into mouths, which in turn pronounce Lucia, Lucia, a prayer, a searching, as if they might suddenly recall my great-grandmother, buried over a century now. Earlier, at the city clerk's office, from all those dusty books my family missing, a fire, volumes of records gone, consumed by the turning of the century, the whole shift a catalyst, flint and stone clearing away what came before. The old man, his lawn chair crooked on cobblestone, pointed along the hill to the graveyard, told us they are only keeping the good bones, the others removed and boxed. I comb the paths looking for my dead, find my name carved into its rocks. I have cried every day I've been here. The cathedral's shadow falling over us. Tiramisu makes the rounds, little paper plates held to our breasts like sacrament. The more residents called forward from the clutch that survived emigration in this mountain town, winnowed down to 800. A woman works over the dates with me, idly twists her small gold crucifix, holds me in possibility. I cannot count her God as mine, and yet stare at her wrists, my own. See the veins beneath, know how close to the surface they sit. Oh, creepy silence. Okay.
No, there's no sound. We're absorbing it.
Yeah, I know.
I think we're in awe. Everyone is speechless. They're trying to, their mouths are saying, but there's no way for them to communicate. No, this is great. This is fantastic.
Thanks, John. Okay, so this is yet another home. My mother must have told the story 1,000 times. How they were so excited to set up their new house that they left their honeymoon early, deciding as they strolled Atlantic City's Ocean Promenade to check out of the hotel. It was late October, 1957. Small witches, goblins, a devil, tiny horns, crooked over eyes wide with sugar, pillowcase dragging behind him, followed them up the walk to the front door. My mother, in the burgundy suit with the cloth buttons, hair short and smart, a grocery bag in one arm, apples piled at the top. My father, desperately young, holding her hand as they entered the house they'd bought together, where surely they'd live a long life. The first heart attack 6 years away, the last before their youngest was no bigger than the demons on their doorstep. He would never get to yell at their kids for breaking curfew or slacking on their first job, would barely witness the baby learning her letters. They gave them the apples, the trick-or-treaters, dealt out a whole bag of the fruit as more and more children arrived at their threshold mumbling that sing-song refrain. Were they golden delicious, Macintosh, mealy, or crisp? I don't know. At each telling, my mother would end on the apples, no matter how many times she replayed it, coming back and back to that one sweet thing. So, all right, so I've sort of, let you off the hook until now, but this next poem requires a little bit more of my listeners. It's just a little bit more to comb through. So thank you in advance for listening. This poem kind of introduces my History of the Alphabet series. I'm going to read a couple of poems for letters and that spring from some little point along their historical derivation. But this first poem is an imagining from 4,000 years ago, as you do. You imagine people from 4,000 years ago, So the alphabet, as we know it in English, began, most people think, on the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, but was started by immigrants, Northwest Semitic peoples, many of whom were working the turquoise mines on the peninsula at the time. So if anybody's familiar with Egyptian culture, there's the goddess Hathor. The Northwest Semitic people's equivalent to Hathor is Balat. And the very first inscription translated in this new weird alphabet was found in a temple near the mines, the turquoise mines. And it was a prayer to Balat, and noted the author as beloved of Balat. So she was the goddess of many things, motherhood, but she was also the goddess of miners, and she was known as the Lady of Turquoise. And similarities again with Hathor, if you know that culture. I think I've told you everything you need to know from the epigraph. But I've basically imagined, immigrants far from home doing a really difficult, really dirty, really dangerous job. And what if their goddess showed up? What if she came to them? So this is called Balat Pays a Visit to Her Devotees. Dragonflies of ancient Egypt, wings of lapis lazuli, eyes blue-green gems, were not yet weary of metaphors they had to carry, transitions and transformations still young among the peninsula's marl, dolostone. When the astonished dawn swooped down on the red land outside the caves. Surely you can imagine the miners, blinded, crawling from the rocks, heads hanging lank from their necks, sweat collecting at their throats like amulets, drunk for the love of her. It's difficult, the work of the world, chipping away at sharp corners, long days in the dark, searching. The greater the kingdom, the harder to be its slave. And this scene, don't you see it? How she stands before them, vision, luminary, skirts swirling like lapidary, her face a library of light. How to allow the hallowed to sit beside us, our tattered furniture. Wouldn't any of us, face to face with our most precious desire, not comprehend our fortune? Awestruck, still entangled in the profane, they freeze, unable to call her name, name of their goddess, that which they adore, failing to fly in its double-winged flight from their lips. A shower of new letters to fortify their devotion. They reach for chisels, knives, arrow-tipped, throw themselves at the stones that bleed out easily, whole tons. Isn't it still the way? Don't we weep at the sight of what is holy? Cast our sorry beings toward the wealth burning in our hearts, what we could, at the moment of revelation, never imagine speaking aloud. Let me check my time. Okay. So this next poem is for the letter O, and I wrote it a long time ago because I've been working on the series for an embarrassingly long time. It was the first one I wrote, and satisfyingly, it was the first one accepted for publication, actually. So it's just called an ode, and the letter O is descended from the Semitic word ein, meaning I in Phoenician. Look, Mama, I can draw an O. He meets the single curved line perfectly, then makes another and another. We begin here, in love with sentences, cast ourselves prostrate in front of letters. Before Beowulf, in its squirrely old English, before Dickinson's drawers of hand-bound fossicles, before Mandelstam, and whatever the last thing was he scrawled in that exquisite Cyrillic the night Stalin's henchmen dragged him away for the last time. Oh, everywhere, O's, an alphabet of images, the wheel, bright balls hurled across the playground, dark knots in the oak, orifices of the body, wreaths on snowy graves. My son writes his name. O after delicate O, drifting up the page like soap bubbles to spell Isaac. I should have named him Orlando or Otto or Ovidio, O's bookmarking the label of who he is, spiral of the soul circling closer and closer to nirvana. Oh, great writers. Oh, small boy. We reach up from the same tiny building blocks. The portal now open. May the floodgates give way to an effusion of light. A lettered future spilling its abundance. May he continue, steady in his line, even when the paths end where they begin. May this be a birth, like the one not that long ago, when he first blinked awake, one watery eye. How are we doing? I have a couple more poems if we're like up for it, but I can also cut us short.
Yeah, we have to end at midnight. So you have, I think, 10 hours and no, you have another 5 or 10 minutes, whatever works for you. We want to leave time for the audience. We're hoping that they've regained their voices so they can ask you some questions. So.
Okay, I'll just read maybe 2 more. So this is another letter poem, and it's for the letter N. So many of the letters would not be recognizable in some of their earlier shapes. Happens over 4,000 years. The letter N derives from the Phoenicians' letter nun, meaning fish. And I also have a little quote that starts this one. It's from Professor Hugh Herr, who is at MIT in the Department of Biomechatronics. And this was from a TED Talk he gave called, wait for it, How We'll Become Cyborgs and Extend Human Potential. And Dr. Herr said, humans may also extend their bodies into non-anthropomorphic structures such as wings. During the twilight years of this century, I believe humans will be unrecognizable in morphology and dynamics from what we are today. This is N, cheating evolution. What if we could have wings? Our shoulder blades glistening with gossamer, ruffling in the breeze. Descendants who flew to the store to get milk, who soared hawk-like over the landscape. No more slamming doors at the sudden end of arguments. We register our vexation instead with the snap of feathers opening. Or perhaps rise above petty differences with our mastery of lift and thrust. Who would pay attention or even care about the atrophy of our feet? What with the view available from our perch in treetop cafes? Once we were fish crawling onto shore, leaving behind waves, craving only legs, trading a fin for wing, a natural progression. And so, after so many eons of walking, running, maybe the body is ready for what comes next. Who wants to move at the speed of alphabets, or worse, wait another 400 million years to ascend into the atmosphere? Still, whenever we'd fall from the blue arms of the sky, we'd cry, our sea salt past leaking from our eyes. And I will just close with this one because it comes kind of full circle back to home as the planet and to the river that Natalie Diaz spoke about. So this is called Preemptive Elegy. It comes from what I call my cheery apocalyptic series. And it's actually not facetious. I actually think they're weirdly hopeful and apocalyptic. Okay. Preemptive Elegy. You have been placed in the front row of an encore to disaster. So why not scream while the waves crash? Sometimes no railroad tracks are handy. Sound travels fast, 5 times faster underwater. The message, after all, is urgent. Throw your arms wide as crests stretch and rise. Look through Empyrean blue to the other side. I don't know from dust, it's water we'll return to. Are you sure all that weeping is the way you want to go out? Call it preemptive elegy, but I recommend you sing like the rains taught you. There's no point in collecting stones from dry sand. They're always more beautiful, baptized by the source. You have a chance to rinse clean borders, dissolve the idea of river as boundary, grave, estuary of calamity, to wash out dirty laundry with just your voice. Like the unborn listening through the skull, make us vibrate with Baudry gospel we need to hear. Changing courses for the lost. You know exactly where home is. Set the compass and let the moon pull you in, theater in the round. Flatten your diaphragm while you praise them all. Slough, lagoon, the brackish sound. Thanks so much for listening.
No, thank you very much. That was an amazing half hour or so of poetry. And obviously, I have to call up Natalie Diaz as soon as this ends just to chat with her. No, that's great. Listen, I'm glad you felt free to share someone else's work. That's really nice. So I'll ask the people that are on the call if they want to unmute and ask some questions. As I say, don't let Kathryn get off easy. This is the time to really quiz her about, if there's rhyming in her poem. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. This is like a humor day because the air conditioning is working, so I'm more normal. Yesterday I was a little more manic. So let's see. There is someone in the chat says from Rebecca Rose Langston. So incredible, Kitty. I love hearing your poetry. So
It's Rebecca.
It was
anyone
just
else?
a terrific reading, Kitty. This is Elliot out here in Carmel, California. And it was absolutely terrific reading. And I absolutely love the imagery, especially in the blood poem. Just wonderful. The ministry of cheese making and the plates of tiramisu as sacraments, held up as sacraments. That was just stunning. Absolutely wonderful. So I loved it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elliot. Thanks for being here.
So let's see. We still have Cleo, Susanna, Kathy, Rita. Anybody else want to comments, questions?
Yeah, I'm wondering how many of the alphabet series you've gotten and what you're going to do when you get to Z.
Yeah, so I have poems for at least one poem for every letter of the alphabet, plus some of those poems that are kind of byproducts of the project, like the Balat poem, the goddess poem. So I have poems for all of them. I don't like all of the poems, but I would say the majority of them have been pretty workshopped. And I'm working on putting together a manuscript now, not just of the letter poems, but wrapping in lots of work. So I'm working on compiling a collection right now. And Cleo, I'm trying to understand your message about, the letters have origins that have meaning of a whole word. Oh, yeah. So, okay, I think I understand what you're saying, and I can explain. So, yeah, don't get me started because we could be here till midnight. But as I love my letters, but the Phoenicians, and this is true. Help me, Rebecca, Elliot, in Hebrew too. This is true that the letters. They're not just so Hebrew is the living language that's closest to the ancient letters, and there is so like our letter A is just an A. It doesn't mean anything else. But in the ancient alphabet, Aleph had a meaning. So it wasn't just an A, which sounds nothing like our A, by the way, and that's a whole other story. But it meant ox. Right. The word B was bite. It meant house. So it started they would pick something from their everyday life that started with that sound to name that sound. Does that make sense? Yeah, and it's actually one of the reasons that they could start to figure out, and translate the letters, the alphabet. Yeah, thanks to that element and its proximity to Hebrew.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah, and so those folks that were working the turquoise mines on the Sinai Peninsula, those were the ancestors of the Phoenicians. And then the Phoenicians, probably not a single group either, but they're the famous, boat traders, so they bring then this system of writing to, in our case for English, the Greeks, and then the Etruscans, and then the Romans. And some of those groups, it's not like they were like one and then the next, like some of those coexisted at this, they overlapped.
Yeah, no, really interesting.
Yeah.
This
Anybody
may be a really
else?
stupid question, but
I love stupid questions.
okay, cool. I was gonna ask what you find some of your biggest challenges as a poet and what you find some of the most rewarding things about it.
That's kind of hard.
I know, that's what I meant by it might be stupid.
Yeah, no, but it's good to think about. I mean, I'll say, I mean, maybe I'll take the first half, the second half first. So the most rewarding, I think, is slowing time, you know, being able to go back and rethink something, restory something, you know, mull it over, but sometimes even just change it. You know, just be like, I don't really like what happened in that memory of mine, and I'm gonna write a poem that challenges that, or you know, so I think just that ability to capture time is one of my favorite things, and just I think, you know, the music of the language, I just love it. My biggest challenge, like in terms of,
oh, sorry, I was just going to say you definitely made me appreciate the music of the language a lot today. So
oh, thank you. And so, are you thinking of in terms of challenges, like in terms of actually writing the poem or being a poet, or
writing the poem? Writing
the poem.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes the biggest challenge is finding time.
I get it.
You know, a lot of poets talked about they couldn't write during the pandemic. I wrote a lot. It worked for me. And, you know, and I realized, you know, the privileged space that I'm in saying that, but also, you know, I'm like, it's very un-American to say, but I hate being in a car, right? I despise driving. I hate commuting. I hate running errands, picking up kids, dropping off kids, and the pandemic, you know, erased all that, and it was wonderful. Now we're sort of kind of back to it, right? But like the expanse of the day, you know, punctuated by meals, what a luxury. So yeah, finding time, and then yeah, I don't know. There's always challenges in terms of, I always feel like I need to read more or know more. You know, it's everything. You learn more of what you don't know, the more you know, you know.
You're muted. You're muted.
How would you characterize the difference between prose and poetry, since so much modern poetry uses prose, yet does not sound like prose?
Yeah. Well, I think the two things, I think, you know, a lot of genre, there's a lot of genre blending happening, I think, for good right now. And I think, you know, if you write poetry, it will certainly help your prose, and potentially vice versa. I would say, you know, poetry is something that encapsulates, right? It economizes language. And I think some of the more editorial, prosy lines that come out in poetry have something to do with that kind of like creating that intimacy with a listener, and kind of like breaking out. It's like I can do this other thing because I'm also writing in this poetic form. I'm writing in these lines, and I'm writing with, you know, a distilled attention to the moment, and maybe I'm even writing in a form, or, you know, but then to kind of break away and you know, ask a question, you know, come out with something that sounds a little bit more conversational. I think, you know, the two things play off each other, and that sort of pulls someone in. So we're not lost just in a too steady beat. Does that make sense? Yeah. I don't know. There could be a lot of answers to that question, but.
Good. Anybody else have any questions or comments? It seems to be quiet across the board. Kathryn, thank you for an amazing and inspiring. I don't know what Rebecca called the word magic. You use different terms, but there was a lot of. I felt like the words were washing over me, and it was just great to hear. And the stories, the artichoke, the family, just stories from so many different perspectives. So I want to thank you for really sharing your work with us.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for listening on a afternoon, random afternoon or morning on the West Coast.
And Cleo said, I love the naming of things, the naming of plants, and how naming does something.
Yeah.
Yeah, the naming thing, I don't know, years ago, when you got named, that was, kind of you crossed a threshold in your journey when you could get named and assumed your name. I'm not translating it right, but probably something I read years ago. And now, listen, naming gives it an identity. So no, it's fantastic. Thank you so much.
It brings it to us, to our attention, I guess.
Yeah. Well, good. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Kitty.
Kathryn, thank you again for just an amazing reading and sharing your work and your creative process.
Thanks so much.
We have 3 more weeks until we're going to take a summer break. So hopefully you can go to the library and see what's happening next week at 1 o'clock. All right. Very good. Thanks again, everyone. Hope to see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Kitty. Debbie says goodbye too.
Bye.